So this morning I was invited to talk about some of the work we're doing in Alberta, and with the introduction of me of all my background education, I'm just a farm girl from the Paw, Manitoba. So what I do now with Alberta at the college is a number of projects that are applied research. So just to orient you to what we're doing with applied research, it basically means that I need to work with industry, ranchers, and farmers on issues that they think are important. And without their support, the research that I do really wouldn't get done because it needs to be funded by these different commodity groups, and the ranchers need to, they want to have this particular solution looked at. So I do also work in the area of technology and new innovations, primarily because when I started with Lakeland College, they had just introduced a new Bachelor of Ag Technology degree program. And that degree program allows students that have had like a 2-year diploma in ag move into a further 2 years of study and get this bachelor's degree. And it entails 1 year of coursework, but in their second year, they're put into a practicum or internship type situation. And so they work with different companies that are using different technologies, but I've also hired some of them to help me with my research. And they've been excellent students because they usually come from some kind of a farm background. And so I can incorporate them into my research, and they can do the real hands-on, the cowboy stuff, all those things that I need them to do with the cattle. It works out really well. Plus, they have that background in a lot of GIS, GPS, mapping. They get that good base from that degree program. So I strongly encourage you, if anyone's thinking of a degree, Lakeland College is an option for you. So what we need to do is, get producers. We need to also get the students learning about some of my research, because I'm using technology that has promise. So it's something that in the future a rancher might want to adopt. Now, a lot of the stuff I'll show you today is probably a little too pricey right now, but in time, those technologies will come down, and there are some great applications for where they can be used. And then, of course, I have to do extension and KTT work, so get the word out that these things either work or don't work, or they work under certain situations and not others. So the first project I want to talk about is what we call our GPS Bull project. And this project was brought to me by Highland Feeders. So that's a large cow-calf and feedlot operation up in northern Alberta. They run about 2,500 cows, a lot of them in Alberta, but they do pasture some in Saskatchewan. And so we were funded by the CAP program, Canadian Agriculture Partnership, and then RDAR, Results Driven Ag Research. University of Alberta was also a partner on this with me, because they were also looking at the same GPS tags under a different scenario in their pasture. So I think you can appreciate that the issue that this farmer had, and probably very much like we would find pastures in the Inner Lake area, a lot of bush, a lot of forest. You don't just go to check your cows and see them all. They're hiding. A little bit of different topography. And so we wanted to see if we could track our bulls, because his issue was when he sends his cattle up to those northern heavily forested pastures up in northern Alberta, he has a far higher open rate than on the pastures that are in the central and southern region. And so he thought the bulls get separated. He knows the bulls just get separated from the cows. If the bull isn't with the cow, he can't do his job. And we know from research that the number one sense that a bull uses to find a cow to breed is actually sight. Okay, the smell and the sound and all those things come in later, but really sight. So if the bull can't see the cow, he doesn't know to hang out with her for the breeding season. So if we could keep the bulls from getting separated from these cow groups, then that was what this rancher wanted. So what we used was a commercially available tag. So we had to use what was out there. Now in the last couple of years, there's been a few more products come on the market, but at the time, we were basically limited to an Australian product called Series, and it's in the bottom, the very bottom of these pictures. So the one version has 2 pins. It's a GPS direct to satellite, so you don't need any infrastructure, you don't need a receiver or something else in your pasture. It's solar charged, so there's a battery in there. And the following year, so that was the first year, that was the only product they had. The following year, we did research after I met with the company and said, here's some of the issues we've had with this 2-pin tag. It looks great because you think 2 pins, oh, that's sturdy, that's not falling out of there. But when they did their engineering pull tests, they pulled the back from the front and they said it's titanium pins, that's not going to come apart. I said, what you failed to do was the crush and the smash test, that when you have bulls in a pasture fighting with each other, they basically fight and they smash those pins together and wiggle them around and get caught, and then they would fall out or rip an ear. So then this past year, they introduced a new reusable product because, again, that 2-pin one was not reusable. Once you put it in, it was to last the life of that animal. And, I mean, if it died before the animal, well, then you didn't get much life out of it. So they put a reusable one on the market, which is the green-backed one. And that one is just your standard all-flex, 1-pin backing. And it worked actually really quite well. So our second year of ear retention is really good. We're quite happy with that one. Up on the top, I'll just show you other ones we considered. It was called a movement tag. It's the orange one. It wasn't quite commercially available. It doesn't look as nice as the other ones, a little more crude. It had a receiver that you had to have. So, of course, that wasn't something we wanted to work with long term, but we did have a few on demo. And then the final one on top on the horses, because that was our practice. And again, like I said, my summer student doing the intern, the practicum, that was his dream job. I sent him out to check pastures on his horses, and he used some of his young colts to get practice riding pastures. He thought it was great. He got to ride around, check the bulls, and then I could look at the data to see where the GPS tag, if it picked up accurately where he was, and I knew that he stopped at lunch at Subway and he had supper at Tim Hortons. So we tracked him just, with the tag outside of the pasture. And it did work well, except there was an issue, and those are the Norwegian tags. We're waiting for them to actually show up to use them with Mary Jane at MBFI. The tag, robustness for the way it's built is fine. There was issues with the data coming back to us, so we're still waiting on that Norwegian tag. So some of the things it can show you, and I put on here 2 screens from the actual platform that is giving us the data, because the way that series tag works is you buy the tag, but then you pay another company to get the data. And a lot of these technology companies, they work that way, right? It's subscription basis. You think you've bought something and you own it. Well, now you have to pay someone else to get the data for you. Every rancher hates that model, but that's sort of so common with all this technology. And so on the left upper one, we can get the paths that an animal has moved, and it's tracked. So each line, and I can color it differently, each line, each color is a different path. So that's the top one. On the bottom one, we can color code the animals. So we color coded cows are pink, the bulls are blue, just so I knew where they are. And so I want to show you this video, and will the video play? Or do I have to press the button? Tap it. Okay. So this shows when we turn the bulls out for the breeding season, and then as the cattle move through all the pastures, so I know where they've gone. I know, if the bulls are not moving with the cows, how they've tracked through these pastures. You'll see that one black line moving around there. Okay. I'll explain that in a minute. Then you see a blue one taking off there. Okay. Then there's another couple of blue ones. Looks like he's not with the rest of the group in the middle there. Now the group is coming grazing. They found him again. Okay, so you can appreciate all these things that were happening with these GPS tags. So just to orient you what was happening, those pastures, that group of 350 cows and 16 bulls had access to these 7 quarters, and we rotated them through them from the bottom, number 1, up to 3. There's 2 quarters in that block of 3. Then they moved to 4, 5, and 6. What happened with that tracking that you see is we know bulls got left behind, because even when the cowboys go to open the gates and do moves, they can't see all the animals. And in fact, the first year when they were doing one of the moves, the particular technology we were working with didn't have a smartphone app for it, so the cowboys couldn't see where the animals were. So then they phoned me. They're like, Susan, can you go on the computer? We think we're missing about 30 cattle. Can you tell us where they are so we don't have to ride the whole pasture? So I go on the computer, I'm like, oh, they're in the southwest corner, thanks. And then off he goes and can round them up, and they didn't have to waste time looking around. But back to that tracking, that one animal that was in the black coloring, and maybe you can play it again. Can you play the video again? If I go back, yeah. Okay. So the one black one is a cow tagged from the first year's trial. Okay, and so that's just another group. There's only one cow in there that's in a whole big group, but she's the only one that had the tag left, because again, I had those 2-pin GPS tags that fell out. So that group of cattle is close to my group of cattle, and of course, when the bull got separated from the other cows, he ends up going into that group, because that's the closest cows he could see, so why not? The other thing you might have noticed, there was one blue bull that kind of sped off a little quickly. We noted that he got injured. And so when the cowboys went to pick him up, when they're driving out in a truck, he moves a lot faster than when he's just walking around the pasture. So you see that too. When I look at the data daily, I can see, oh, somebody's either cattle rustled or the cowboys have taken care of him, take him home. So those types of things are very useful with this technology. What else was I going to say about the cows? Oh, and then of course injured. So you'll see a bull that just isn't moving as much. Of course, I've sped it up there, and that was the whole breeding season. So that was basically, you saw 60 days in 10 seconds. When you slow it down, you see a lot more nuances of how they're behaving. The other thing you notice is where they have and haven't grazed. So that was quite obvious. Now, there was one patch up on would have been the north of the pasture 6. They didn't want to graze that, and I couldn't figure out why, because it looks fairly open. It's more of an open pasture in the number 6. But the water sources are all in the south, so they tend to stay in the south. So in that particular quarter, he wasn't getting as good utilization of the pasture because the cattle just stuck around the water more so. And the other one was, of course, in the pasture 3, where it was so heavily forested, they hardly went in that bush area. So there's a big patch there. So once we look back at the data, or even from a week to a week, we can see where they are overgrazing, where they're not grazing. And now that he knows this about the cattle, he can make some changes about maybe moving them in and holding them in an area, or maybe a cross fence if that's something he wants to do. But the GPS was really handy for finding, how many of these bulls that we're getting separated and not breeding. So the other thing, we had the similar GPS technology going at the college with the cattle there, and they've got what they call the research herd that I'm allowed to work with. It's about 100 cows in this herd, and we tagged, again, we never tag all the cows because it's too expensive. Probably you'll ask me at the end, how much do those tags cost? Well, they're about $150. If you want the 2-pinned tag that gives you data every hour, you can pay $400 for that. Now, what I found about some of these technology companies is overpromise, underdeliver. So they may say you get every hour data. Not totally their fault. You do need to know that if you're dealing with a company that's in Australia, that they're likely going to be dealing with satellites that are in the southern hemisphere. Those don't come over as often as the ones that are in the northern hemisphere, and so that's why issues with not consistent data like they say on their website. Now, if I was an Australian rancher, I might be getting every hour, but not in Canada. So that's just one of the issues. And the other one was when you have the GPS technology on forested areas, and there's solar, the battery is a solar battery, it can't get charged up when the cow is in the forest grazing for a day, and especially if you've got some rainy days or cloudy cover, it just doesn't get enough sun. So there might be a few days when you're losing data or you don't get everything that you think you should. But in the scheme of things, when I look from start to end on a breeding season, I have some pretty good information here for this rancher. And so I've done other talks, and there was a lot of interest from some community pastures. They thought, to tag the bulls that go in just to know that they're with the cows, that they're moving, because again, that series tag, and like a lot of these GPS tags, it has accelerometers in it. So you not only get the GPS fix or the location where the cattle are, you also get an activity level. So to know that it's, extreme level, it means he might be running somewhere or getting chased by something, versus low or no level, meaning he's sick and laying down or dead, are all useful pieces of information in with that GPS fix. Now, it's not foolproof. Like I said, some tags fall out. So the tag is there. It's not the bull. He's not sick. You go there and you usually can find it. We've done some what we call recovery missions. We put in the last known GPS coordinates of those tags into our drone. We send the drone there. It hovers above, and then we can walk in that area, and we usually find the tags. The GPS fixes are accurate. Okay, so at the college, what happened was we tagged them. You see a lot of activity up the side that's their travel path. It was a narrow alley that they had to go for water to the north. And when we looked at this week 1 and then week 2 of just mapping where they were, what they were doing, cow 31C ended up being on the wrong side of the pasture, and no one figured that out in the first 2 weeks. Because part of my research was I just, look at the data periodically. I'm not always checking the cattle. The odd time I will go out and check the cattle, but I compile the data and then look at it when I have time. So obviously when I had time and I alerted them that 31C has been on the wrong side for all this time, she got missed and she ended up being open. So she missed her breeding window. So that explained her issue. And then we get to see where the cattle are, obviously. So you wonder sometimes about your bulls. Like I said, they were injured, some were hurt. In that, of those 16 bulls, we had 2. We had one that got injured with a leg issue and another one that broke his penis. And sometimes you wonder, geez, how does all this happen? They're spread out. Sure, when you turn them out initially, that first week or so, a lot of activity, the bulls are fighting, but after that, they really spread out and go with their cow groups. Well, this video will explain it, so can you play the video? So again, part of my students' work was to go out and validate some of this GPS activity with a drone. And so one day he went out and flew the drone and captured this incident. And it helped explain why that one bull was injured like he was. So we typically have, most times, right over on his back. So you typically have more than one bull is with one cow, so they're always competing. And that's the end of that video. We can advance it. So that's our GPS information. Of course, we're compiling some of what it means, return on investment of these tags. We know there were some bulls that weren't with the cow group for at least 4 or 5 days. What does that mean to you in terms of how many bulls do you need to put in, how many potential, pounds lost if you have later, the herd moving a little later into breeding. So all that data is coming yet. So the next one is this ranching, precision ranching, the heifer selection, and also the grazing efficiencies. And that's the project that I've partnered with Mary Jane and MBFI on, as well as a group with Thompson Rivers University, that's out of Kamloops, Alberta. We have a rancher from Buck Lake Ranch, and that's in the, if you've ever gone skiing in Big White, south of Kelowna, he's just south of that area. So we had a lot of funding, good interest in this project. Again, Highland Feeders is my Alberta ranch that I was working with. Used a lot of different technologies, and I'm going to break it down, some of the things that we did with this. So it's 2 parts. Part of this was about mapping the ranch and your assets and what you can get from that land assessment. And the other part is about selecting replacement heifers and really selecting replacement heifers as early as possible in their life as you can, as opposed to our current standard, which is we select the heifers that we like the looks of, or we have pedigree, or we have data on them, and then we turn them out to be bred with a bull, and we limit it to 42 days or less, and whoever's open goes, and whoever's pregnant stays. Well, that's fine, but if my pasture resources that I need to turn all those animals out onto are limited, if I could know who was the better or the chance of, one that's more reproductively mature, a better chance of being bred before I used up the pasture, would be ideal. So that's the intent of this project. So let's start with the pasture mapping information. So the BC ranch was my demo here where we did everything on. Again, we sent out a drone, it mapped, and again, we can program the drone and it just runs back and forth. It's like a autonomous drone. It just moves. Once we put the coordinates in, it just maps everything. So now we have this basically a digital twin, or what we call a 3D picture of your ranch. We know where the barn is in the middle. We know where the feedlot pens are, his roads, fence lines, all that stuff we can map. And I worked with this company called Lamazoo Interactive. They're out of Victoria, BC. And they've been in the space of mostly forestry and mining. And they map those particular, the assets of the forestry and mining, and then build them these same kind of digital maps so that, for instance, in mining, they can track, and with GPS in trucks, they can track when the trucks come in, how long it takes them to come in, pick up a load, go out, how fast people are, and improve the efficiencies on the trucks, and even how long it takes to fill up the piles of gravel. Like, all those things can be mapped once they put GPS on the tractors and equipment, and they know where they're going and how fast they go. So the ranchers thought, can we do something similar? And so that's where this has come about. You get many layers of data, so I'm just quickly showing you without a whole lot of detail that they can put all the assets and layers of data to it in different ways. So this is one way, a true picture of that season. But the other way is you can do a heat map. And so when we say the heat map, we can see from the different crops on the different pieces which have more exposed soil, so a thinner area of the crop compared to where it's more lush. And so your red shows up as maybe less vegetation compared to the darker green. And of course the forest ones, the trees show up blue, a little cooler. And so that's all important information for if you're planning for drought, where the areas that are drier are located compared to the ones that are not, that have more lushness, or even how heavily you graze it. The other thing we did was layer on those GPS tags. So now each one of those little teardrop orange points is an actual cow with a GPS tag in her ear. And in BC, they don't have perimeter fencing on all their grazing land. So they graze these forest reserves. And so when you send the cattle out from your yard and your land, they go up into the mountains as far as they want. And typically what brings them home is cold weather, or they get hungry. Oh, I didn't. Oh, okay, well, look to this side. Okay, so on the other side, we can see that we've got all the points of the cattle, so I know where they are. Really interesting stuff here with how far they travel out, because these ranchers never really knew how far the cattle would go. And we have some recorded over 18 kilometers away from the base ranch. And the other funny thing was, at the end of the season, when the cattle were coming in, this particular producer, he had 3 heifers that were missing in his yard, but he knew exactly where they were because their GPS tag thankfully stayed in. They don't all stay in, like I said. And they were at his neighbor's farm. And so he phoned to the neighbor, and he said, when am I getting back my 3 heifers? And the guy said, what do you mean? What heifers? And he said, well, those 3 heifers of mine, I know they're over there. Oh, what do you mean? Like, he was denying that he had his heifers. And so my rancher said, they have GPS tags in them. I'm coming over to get them. Just let me know when you're home. And that was the end of that story. He said now his neighbor respects him a little more than he used to. So when we dial into that pinpoint, that teardrop, I can get down now with this particular twinning of the ranch to this cow avatar, I'll call her. And so if I need to know what cow is out there back in that bush, because we've put all these layers of data in, I know, what her tag number is. I know some information about her, what age she is. Whatever I've put in the background on these cows when we entered this data is now accompanying her wherever she moves along. So I know exactly which cow is where with this layer of data. And again, because, this might not be in every province, but in BC, because the forestry mapping is so good, they have a lot of elevation and different aspects to it, and so we can get that part as well. So in here, I'm just showing you that we have, elevation change, the distances, and so if you were trying to find where these cows were, you could look at what is the elevation there. Is there a path that I can go to travel and get her? All those aspects are now part of your map, and you can look at, deeper into the layers if need be. Now, right now, this is not something that any rancher is going to jump out and purchase. Far too expensive. I almost hate to say what the subscription is, but I'll tell you. Because I just think it's so outrageous. So for 1 year subscription, you can have this on your ranch for $20,000. Yeah. Okay, so now you know about the expensive stuff that's sort of way out in the future, but there's a lot of promise, and I mean, there's bits and pieces of it that certainly do work. And like I said, the GPS tags, they've come a long way. There's another one that I think has maybe more promise than what we're waiting on with our Norwegian tag that's yet to show up. 701X, I think it's out of North Dakota or South Dakota, so it's an American product, which means North American satellites, which means that's good because they come over a lot more often. So maybe if you're thinking of GPS tags, and especially, like I said, community pastures or just for a few bulls to know where they are, works quite well. So 701X is maybe something to look into. All right, the next part of this project was the actual heifer development. So I really focused here on commercial heifers. So I just want to know who's got commercial cattle as opposed to being purebred. Okay, so a good variety. All right, so we know it's not as easy getting commercial heifer sort of EPDs and information genetically because the breeds have those, and when you cross them, you don't know what you're getting. So we have a number of genomic tools that I'll talk to later. But first, the two research questions. So like I said, is there some indicator, some trait? Is there anything that we can know sooner in that heifer's life that would help us select her as being a promising breeding female, as opposed to waiting until she doesn't catch and then I have to cull her or sell her? And then, of course, what tools are out there, because I don't want to allocate any of my expensive resources, and it's probably no different here than it is in Alberta, where it's hard to get labor. We don't have a whole lot of extra people around, and so any job that we can, get done by just ourselves or without having to hire someone is ideal. So again, so the focus for a cow-calf producer, your number one economic trait is going to be fertility. Without fertility, you don't have, the economics in that herd. And then your growth traits are next, and then your carcass would be number 3. So we really are focusing here on fertility, but not giving up, any growth and carcass traits. So we want to keep track of them, but the focus is really fertility. So in the center, you'll see I have it's a bolus. It's about 10 centimeters in length. We put one of those boluses in every one of these research heifers. And so that bolus has in it a thermometer, so it tracks her temperature on an hourly basis, and it also tracks her activity. There's an accelerometer in there. Now, that bolus does need a receiver, so those heifers need to be passing by the receiver every now and again so that it can download her data. Works decently well, right, Mary Jane? It's okay, yeah. And so the intent of it was for the dairy industry initially. That's what it's been developed for. We wondered if it had applications with beef cattle to let us know when the heifer's in heat. Because what we know about heifers in heat is if heifers have had at least 2 heats, or if they've hit puberty and had 2 cycles, and then they get exposed to a bull, their chances of being bred, or their likelihood to conceive, is about 20 to 30% higher than if they're immature and they've only had 1 cycle or no cycles. Okay, so we wanted heifers that were mature enough for our program. So whether you're breeding them to calve in February or May or whatever, doesn't matter. It's just you want them to be mature enough for your program. So in this case, this herd at the college was May calving, so they're a later calving herd, and so we had those in there. We also did feed efficiency testing. So are you familiar with grow-safe bunks where you can do individual feed testing? So we did that on the Alberta group. We didn't have access to that equipment at Manitoba nor in BC, but I do have it for Alberta. And so most of my results here are about the Alberta group. And then we had a 1-cup AI camera that's up on the top, and that was basically to validate what we saw in the pens, mostly for looking if the heifers are in heat, jumping each other. But the other thing was it was there to, our project was there to help this 1-cup AI company develop the algorithm for heat, because we need to tell the camera that when you see 2 heifers jumping or chin resting or whatever the behavior is, that means they're coming into heat. So please alert us to that. So that camera had to get trained with noticing when that happened in the pen. We did some DNA, and of course we did some carcass ultrasound as well. So I'm just going to show what happens here in this particular video. We have the night cameras on, and you think when it's nighttime everyone should be resting, but what happens is if someone's in heat, they're going to let everybody else know about it in the group. So it disturbs everybody. And so, she's having her nighttime snack. Everyone else is bedded down. But you know what? Just so everyone knows. Yeah. So that way we could validate. And so again, the camera allowed us to go back, and I had a summer student look through the video and just validate, who was in heat and when. Oh, advancing? Okay. So with that bolus, what it does is about 3 or 4 hours after a heat event like that, and the heat event is triggered because she has increased activity and increased temperature, and then that activity and temperature goes down after about 3 hours or so. You get this peak that it shows here, temperature and activity increased, and then 3 to 5 hours later, that bolus will alert you on your smartphone to your app that she's probably in heat. Now, what we know about the bolus, like I said, it's for the dairy industry, so they're confined. They have a little less activity normally than what a beef animal would, so a lot of false positives. We've sent our data back to this company. They're rerunning the algorithm, so hopefully that'll improve what heat alert would be for a beef animal. Let's see, the other thing about that, yeah, the false positives. Oh, and then with the beef heifers. Okay, so they're more active, and also young heifers. If a yearling heifer has this bolus, you get way more false positives than when she's a 2-year-old or 3-year-old. So just general activity level settles down, and really no different than kids, right? I mean, when they're young, they're all energy and rambunctious, and as you get older, you don't have as much energy, so it does change there. So it was somewhat useful when we sent the ones that we actually look, I had observations on them from my staff to say, okay, here, we know she's in heat, let's check the bolus, and fairly good, but it's not perfect. So we're still waiting again for that company and it's out of, was a Hungarian and a Irish company together that were doing this data, and they're working on that new algorithm. The one thing that we did do that was quite useful was Reproductive scoring. And so you might be familiar, if you sell replacement heifers at an auction market, they might offer, we'll palpate them. Well, this is different. So a palpation is typically, unless they offer it differently here, it's typically, they just make sure she has all the right parts to conceive a calf. They'll probably identify some free martins for you, maybe a narrow pelvis or something like that, but that's pretty much it. With this reproductive tract scoring, I get the vet out. It costs no more than preg checking. It's a very similar procedure. And they'll look at how mature she is, if she's ovulated recently, if she's reached puberty or not, and so it scores them on a score of 1 to 5. So 1s and 2s are fairly immature. They haven't reached puberty yet. 3s probably have just had one cycle or just starting into one cycle, and 4s and 5s have had more than one. So we like the heifers to score at least 3, 4, and 5. The thing about the free martins too is, again, now I'm working with a large producer that he doesn't keep his own heifers, he buys them. And so when you buy, 400 replacement heifers from someone, they don't come with a whole lot of records. So he doesn't really know, he knows the birth date range, that maybe calving started in March 1 and ended whenever, but he doesn't really know much else. So that's why we needed to do a few more of these assessments to kind of get some background on these animals to know which ones are probably the better ones. The free martin, though, there's no way he'd know that, because that particular producer wouldn't have said, oh yeah, I've had this heifer here that I think looks good, but I know she was a twin to a bull calf. We don't know that. And the other thing you don't know about free martins is, even though you have a calf born, a heifer, a single heifer without a twin, she could still have been a free martin, because that bull calf might have reabsorbed earlier on in gestation. So you never knew it even existed. And so that was, the white face in that picture is our free martin. She was a great looking heifer. We really liked her. And we kept her in the trial because part of this research was I wasn't telling the rancher which ones to get rid of early. We just kept everything he wanted to keep. We did our assessments, and then it was to see if anything that I found out during the assessments would have helped him to cull some earlier. So she went out with the bull. When we did the preg checking, I was there, and the cowboys were running her through, and she come up, and of course she's white-faced, and our whole trial had almost all black heifers, so by chance she was very recognizable. And as she's coming up to shoot, I was being a smart ass, and I said, oh, this one's definitely open. And so the cowboys are waiting at the chute. The vet checks are open, and they just looked at me. How did you know? And I said, I'm not that smart. I said, I just remembered, and she's white-faced, so it was easy. And so I told how she was the free martin. So we did this ReproTrack score. Like I said, it costs about $5, $6 per heifer. You do it no more than 60 days before you turn those heifers out to breeding. So that might be an issue for you if you're turning bulls out when you want to do some other farming work or cropping or whatever. But that's when you need to do it because, of course, every month you wait, the heifers get more mature, so their score will change. So ideally, a month or 45 days before, do the check and then see what they come in at. And some of those 1s and 2s may not be mature enough and will either not catch at all or maybe the later calving ones because they need more time to mature. So that brings me to our heifer selection checklist, and I'm almost getting to the end here. And some of these things but just to reiterate what we did, and that is a picture of the Manitoba heifers in there when I went out to visit Mary Jane in the first year. So I didn't talk much yet about the DNA, and I'll get to that in a second here, but just to kind of break this down for you. When we're talking fertility, it's a trait that gets really influenced by your management program, by your nutrition, right? So to choose or select heifers on it is going to be tough. You can't pick them really by genetics that much, but there's a little bit. So we like to say that, your nutrition, your herd health, your environment, all that really makes up 70% of your fertility outcomes. So that's where the bulk of it comes from. So that really only leaves me 30% of influencing the fertility. I can do it through genetics, right, if I know pedigrees or phenotypes. We like to select our heifers based on age and weight. And, benchmarks are, if the heifer is about 55% of her mature body weight at breeding, she's probably big enough and old enough. So your 750, 800-pound heifers is probably what that equates to. You can lower that number if she's exposed to a bull, if she sees a bull before she's sent out for breeding, whereas the higher number is if you AI. Because if she never sees a male, it doesn't really trigger that reproductive as much as it does when she does see a male earlier to the breeding season. Of course, you want correct feet and legs. You want your temperament, and we did measure temperament with these chute lasers, their exit speed. We did the reproductive track score for abnormalities. And then, like I said, you want to breed her at least if she's at the third heat, so she has to be mature enough. So what did we find? Really, there's no differences in all those aspects that are looking at visual assessment, and that's what a lot of ranchers do, right? We look at the heifer, deep body, you can use your 4-H judging skills, feminine head, nice shoulder, all those things. They really don't, you can have a really ugly looking heifer, she still might be reproductively mature enough and be one of your earlier breeding heifers. So on a large scale, no significant differences in number of those measurements: temperament, conformation, the frame score, her size, feed efficiency, body condition score, or those carcass ultrasound measurements. But what was interesting was that reproductive track score, it does tell you about her maturity because it came up significant that the ReproTrack score was related to the change in her back fat from when she came into our facilities after weaning until she went out for prior to mating. So that change in back fat was reflected in the ReproTrack score. And so no different than any other mammal, once you reach a certain, maturity level and have a certain level of back fat, your reproductive, system can kick in. So that's really what that ReproTrack score is telling us. The only interesting thing up on the top of that, where I show the p-value, so the significant one, is the feed consumed per day. And our open heifers ate less than the ones that turned up pregnant. Now, I know there's not a whole lot of data here. This was just year one. I haven't included the Manitoba because they don't have this feed efficiency data, but I can tell you that this is a finding that's been found before, a lot of Dr. John Bassarb's work about some of these feeding behaviors and how they eat. So it's not something you can easily measure or see without doing this RFI test. That's why we have some of these genetic and genomic tests. So why do they eat less? So we think it's because they're maybe a little more not as settled. Maybe they're a little more skittish or flighty. It comes to something about their behavior that's sort of embedded in that, and this has been found with some others. So I want to show you some of the heifers that we had at the college. The students worked through this. It used to be that every year we have what's called a student-managed farm. So when the students come on into the program, they all get a job. So one will be the nutrition boss, one is the repro boss, one is the marketing boss. Like, they each get a job, and they're in charge of discussing with the team how they're going to manage that group of heifers. And when it came down to selecting replacements, it became just, I'm from a farm and we have Simmental and I like that big white face, so I think we should keep her. And the other student in the group was like, well, we have Herefords and I really like, what I do. So they would just debate about the color and the breed. And so by introducing our assessments, we're making this more about what's the genetics, what's some of the other information that you can look at these heifers. Are they reproductively mature? Should you be keeping her? Is she old enough, big enough? All that stuff. So we've incorporated it into the program. So we just use these 4 heifers as an example. And I mean, there's ones up there that don't look that great. Maybe the picture was not that good that day. They're good enough commercial heifers. The herd is fine. So I put the data up here, and I color-coded it because we went through, their RFI means their feed efficiency, and basically if it's a number that's positive, I just colored it red because it's not an ideal thing I want to select on to have the feed inefficient animals. I want the negative ones or the feed efficient ones. Average daily gain, we had a cutoff for this type of heifer. They're Simmental Angus crossbreds. We wanted them to be gaining at least 2 pounds a day during our tests, so if they didn't make that, it would be colored red, but they all made that. Profitability index. So here's the genomic tool. Livestock Gentech and Neogen have created a profitability index. And I brought the brochure because I never remember what's all in it. But so it basically looks at traits. They got birth weight, your 200-day weaning weight, your feed efficiency, the feeding event duration, and that's the one that I said showed up in our heifers as the open ones eating less. It's reflected in this feeding event duration in their DNA profile. Then there's the pre-breeding weight, pre-breeding back fat, and then their age at first calving. So we get some fertility traits in there. From that assessment, so we just pull hairs on all these heifers. That test is about $40. You could get parentage as part of that. You'll get all that DNA assessment. You'll also get what's called breed composition. So now I can look at those black heifers and those blacks with a little fleck of white, and I'll know exactly what percent Simmental is in there, or if there's a little bit of Hereford or Shorthorn or whatever else shows up in there from that breed composition. We do that one time only because, of course, that information doesn't change with the life of that animal. And so you see on the bottom here the breed composition. I've got heifers that are, I've got one, that 310K is basically purebred Angus. So here's a herd that's been crossbreeding Simmental and Angus, and we've still got some purebreds. Not to fret, I mean, if she's a good enough heifer, even though she's purebred, what I would lose out on in her is hybrid vigor, but at least if I know she's the Angus one, then I can sort her off and breed her to my Hereford bull or my Simmental bull, and that would ensure that her offspring have hybrid vigor. Because we all know that's the main advantage of you being commercial cattlemen, is that you're taking advantage of that hybrid vigor. So why would I ever put a purebred black Angus heifer, mate her back to an Angus bull? I'll lose pounds of weaned calf by doing that. You probably get more pounds, well, you will, by doing the cross on her. So anyways, we've got all the percentages in the bottom. There's still a lot of because they kept breeding these heifers back to black Angus for the easy calving ability. And so we've got commercial herds that are basically not far off from being purebred. So this just allowed that group of SMF students now to say, okay, we need to bring in another bull, and then they decided on the new breed. And so then the following animals have more hybrid vigor, and they've actually upped their weaning weights on their calves because that was an issue. They were having weaning weights that weren't really near benchmark levels, and they not that they didn't know why it was, they just kept thinking, a live calf is better than a dead calf. Let's go with easy calving. But you can still find an easy calving bull that's not the same breed as your cows. So that piece changed for them. So go to the index again. I've colored them green if they're a good enough number. And that index was a number of projects going on with Agriculture Canada and U of A, Livestock Gentech. They looked at a whole bunch of commercial heifers and their genetics, and they come up with this index. And basically, anything that's a positive number was a good enough profitability index, and then of course the other numbers are getting significantly poorer. It reflects all those traits I talked to you about, and it's something that we're looking at now and using it in our selection criteria to see if she has that replacement heifer profitability. Now the company, or if you go to that RHPI, they call it, RHPI score, I just want to be really clear here, if you look into this index and scoring, the score is all about her hybrid vigor. So that's why that 100% animal gets like such a low RHPI score, like 0.12, because she's purebred. So she has like 0 points for hybrid vigor. Doesn't mean she's not a good heifer. I mean, there's probably some good purebreds that are better than some crossbreds, but we just need to know if we're doing crossbreds, what the reason for the score is. So I think the score is emphasizing a little too much on the actual hybrid vigor, but I still need to know that information. I'm going to only look at that profitability index when I select these heifers. So just be clear on that between the score. So again, we did the color coding, and now we're following these heifers through. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't always work out like we want. So some of the one good heifer on there, she turned up open in her second year. Just happens, right? So what I want to say, though, is when you're doing research, you have to have a lot of numbers, and that's why that data set with Ag Canada, they had 10,000 commercial heifers, and a lot of them were this Angus Simmental. So I know the numbers are pretty good if you've got Angus Simmental. I mean, there's other breeds in there that it'll be comparable to, but for this group, it was very reflective. So when I looked at our heifer profitability index and their genetics, some of these heifers were above average that's the whole province of Alberta, and there was even some cattlemen in Saskatchewan that submitted their data and a few in BC. So at least I can compare that, okay, the heifers that were bought at Highland Feeders were far above average. The ones at the college are a little bit above average. They're still, if you're above average, you're doing pretty good. So there's room for improvement, but we don't have to come from the bottom floor all the way up, so that's good. The second group was, of course, the first year of heifers that had a calf. They're now pregnant with their second. Again, here's our group. That speckled one was picked by that student-managed farm when they said, I love the ones that look like Speckled Park, so we're going to keep her. What breed do you think she is? Yeah, all of that. Okay, so let's look at her. She's the 344J. She's pretty much half Angus Hereford. Yeah, so that's why I say that breed composition, just by looking at the color of the hide or even some of the conformation, you can be tricked many times. So we do like to do that DNA test, do that heifer, get that heifer profitability index, get the breed composition, know what we're dealing with, and then if you have multiple groups to divide them into, you can sort by sire types. Okay, so back to these J heifers. The one thing I want to show you is her calving date. So the calving dates really corresponded to her reproductive scores, more or less. So for the first two, they did. And then what I know about them now, because we already preg checked, those late calving ones with the lower scores, they got later. Now they're calving into July instead of mid-June. But that 347J, that one on the far side, she was a nice looking black heifer. She calved really early. You'll note her repro-track score is a 2. The only reason she got a 2 was because she actually had a twist and it was something abnormal. And the vet had said to us, I doubt she gets bred. She probably won't calve. But genetically, all her numbers and everything, we loved everything else about her. So if I would have been following my advice and not keep any heifers with a score of 1 or 2, she would have already been down the road. But because we kept her for the research, she ended up becoming pregnant. But this year, she's open. So I don't know, so I mean, because she's open this year, had we let her go and not had that one calf, maybe that would have been better overall. Who knows? But just to show that there is some value in the reprotract scoring, I'm only showing you a few animals. And like I said, if you are dealing with only a few, you're not going to see the big picture effect here. We know from the research, reprotract score is useful. We know this genetics information is useful. And so if I could, advise you of any things, if you want to, test heifers for that profitability index and then sort them into groups for breeding because of their breed composition, you might find some advantages with the offspring, hybrid vigor, and weaning weights, and of course income because of that. So those are the benefits of the data. And mostly it is those hard to see traits that are economically important by doing some of these assessments. So back to the technology, would I be using this technology on my own ranch? No, we don't, for those boluses and GPS tags and those types of things. But this DNA data on heifers that I buy in, yeah, it's probably worthwhile. Ones that we've raised ourselves, that we kind of know the history and some of the breed, maybe not. That's your decision to make. But it is a tool that's available and it is out there. But I just like to leave with the last quote here. Took it from an American publication. It says, longevity is the best measure of success because it encompasses fertility, soundness of body, feet, eyes, udder, mothering ability, disposition, calving ease, disease, and parasite resistance, and foraging ability. So if you can get those cows to stay in your herd for as long as possible, those are the ones that are most valuable and most economically important to you. And if you can do anything to select them earlier on, that's really the benefit of where this research is going. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you very much, Susan. Any questions? And there's 2 mics, one located right by Ray Bittner, he's going for it, and then the other one is just over directly across.
Hi, Dr. Markus. I actually rushed here, 3-hour drive to get here to see this presentation, and I wasn't disappointed, so thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ray Bittner. I work for Manitoba Beef Producers. I also use the SARES tags in our livestock predator program and had many of the similar experiences you did. So after Susan has left the conference or whatever and you've asked her questions, you can come and talk to me too. I have some experience and I really liked what she presented, and it was a realistic thing. So I see a lot of future potential with these tags, but there's a lot of technology to grow yet too. So thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I could have just gave you the nice side of what the tags did well, but I wrote a list to the company, and they had a meeting with me, and it was like 3 pages long of just some of the things that we happened to have happen to us. And the first thing that, the company CEO said to me, well, you're the only one. And I thought, well, I can't be the only one because I know I'm working with someone else that was using them and they had similar. I'm the only one that wrote the list and asked for, some feedback on what we were doing. The one thing I will say he did say to me, and it's probably in their website, he suggested you do not tag mature bulls if there's more than one in a pasture together. And I said, okay, but that really doesn't work for us out here. But now with the single tag, I would totally tag them all with a single GPS tag. And it's reusable, so at the end of the season, when I bring the bulls in, I can cut it out and then keep it and recharge it, and next season use it again if I just want to know about breeding season. Yeah. Any other? Oh, there's a question here.
Yeah, good morning, Dr. Markus. I have a quick question about the technology. A lot of things to learn this morning. Theft protection and the behavioral tracking changes and all that. That's very cool features of GPS. But what was the biggest challenge or limitation that you faced in using the GPS technology, number one? And is there any potential of integrating this GPS technology with other technologies, for example, drones or remote sensing or IoT, Internet of Things? So is there any potential to enhance the accuracy or efficiency of the system?
Yeah, for sure. I think, so you're saying the biggest challenge of using the GPS, well, initially it would have been the cost. So when I sat down with the rancher, his first ideas were, okay, let's tag everybody in the pasture. So let's buy 400 tags, tag them all and see how it goes. And we thought, well, geez, where's that money going to come from? So we went down to the recommendation is if you tag 10% of the cow herd and all your bulls, you'll probably get a pretty good picture, which is what we did. So cost, but then also just some of the things that we thought we knew or the way we interpreted what the company was selling and what actually happened. So again, that satellite issue. Thinking we're going to get 4 data, or every 4 hours, a data point on these animals throughout the day, 24/7. Well, that might happen if you have sun and open pastures in Australia, but when you have trees and cloudy days and cold days, that didn't happen, right? So that was part of it, just not realizing that the satellites weren't as they're accurate, they just don't come over as timely as we thought they would. That was maybe the biggest one. Second part to your question was about Internet of Things and remote sensing. There certainly is information that we could put together. The drones worked well, and now that drones can be so autonomous where we can program missions with GPS coordinates and they'll just fly, as long as they have battery power, they fly and do it. So we can do some tracking that way. We don't have, not that I'm going to eliminate some of these cowboys because we still needed them, but I mean, there could be utility in the drone to go and do these recovery missions, or to actually go over and see if that bull is in fact hurt, or if it's his tag that's left there and he's somewhere else without a tag, right? And the ear retention was definitely a big thing. That was one of the biggest challenges in year one. We lost a lot of tags. So after that first breeding cycle, the first 21 days, I think I had 2 or 3 bulls tagged, and the other 12, they already lost them. This second year was really good. I think I only lost 2 tags, and it was after the second cycle. So I think there are technologies that can be partnered up with this, but the GPS is it's such a great one that it has so many applications. If we can get it to stay in the ear, stay charged, and work throughout the whole season. I'll tell another story about our college students. We had one cow that was going to get culled, but she was tagged with the non-reusable 2-pin GPS tag, and the student said, "Can we cull her, or do we have to keep her because she's on your trial?" And I said, no, this is a great experience. Let's go and cull her, and we'll see where she goes. So they decide to market her on December 9th. She goes to the auction market. December 10th, polar vortex hits. Battery dies. Tag doesn't tell us where she goes. We never knew where she ended up, if she went to the meat plant or if she went in someone else's herd. And that was going to be our big tracking mission, right? So you sometimes think you can get stuff out of the data, and then real life happens, weather and things. Another question here?
Yeah, I was just wondering what your opinion or what your records have showed, like what percentage of, like again, a great presentation, but what percentage of those reproductive traits you think are just strictly hereditary? Like I'm a 3rd generation cattle producer that's always kept their own replacements, and by keeping the big heifers, you got heifers off good milking cows. You've got probably the earlier heifers off cows that cycled quickly. Like I say, we've had very good luck with that, and I'm just wondering, great data, great presentation, but I'm just wondering what's your opinion on how much of those traits are just strictly hereditary?
Okay, so if I go back to that index, they've picked the index because of those traits that they found were really showing up in heifers as providing data towards their longevity. So I mean that it would be more on this pre-breeding weight, the pre-breeding back fat, age at first calving. That one's in there for the hereditary. The reason I did this research, and I know it's all true, when you pick your earlier born heifers, they're probably more mature, so they should be the ones that breed back, but not always. If you know the cows, that's a different scenario than what I was working with, this fellow that buys them from someone that has no data. So totally different, and that's maybe the one thing I'll just emphasize, is that if I'm going to the auction mart, or I'm going to somebody that big ranch with 2,000 cows that I select replacement heifers off of, do I know what I'm getting? It's different when, if you are selecting and you know the cow families, you've kept data. Not everyone keeps data, unfortunately, has pedigrees like yourself. So as far as some of these hereditary, like I said, 30% of it is genetics, and that's from the research. I kind of lumped it together. So 1/3 of the traits in these animals, I can maybe, get them back to the hereditary influence, but 70% of it is your management and how you feed those cows. We wanted to get away from picking and telling everyone you need to pick those heifers that are earlier born because they're bigger, because sometimes you get a bigger cow herd that eats more, and then it costs you more. So that was another piece of the story that we wanted to get away from, saying you don't always have to pick the biggest earlier born. Maybe there's some that are not the biggest, but they've got the right age on them, and they'll work for you too. It just depends on what you want to get for that calf herd. So those are just some of the different things we had to consider, because we don't want to get a bigger cow size in our herds overall, and that's what it was trending towards with some of the herds we looked at. But yeah, the 30% is the hereditary portion. So that's 1/3. That's not good enough, right? Like majority is, I should be finding at least 50% to have something that's meaning for you to change. And I don't. I can only offer you 30% through this index.
Thanks.
Okay?